The wind had teeth. Richard Matthews pulled his collar tight against the January gale, his boots grinding ice on the platform of Prospect Station. 20 miles from anywhere, the remote Wyoming outpost stood like a gravestone against the dying light. He checked his pocket watch for the 5th time in as many minutes, 4:17. The train from Cheyenne was 40 minutes late. At home, his daughter burned with fever. Emma had been sick for 3 days now, getting worse each night. The local veterinarian had done what he could. Shaking his head as he left, "Get a real doctor." "Richard, this is beyond me." So Richard had wired ahead, paying double for medical supplies and begging any physician to make the journey. "Wait, chedo car to buy." The responding telegram had been brief. "Supplies coming. Doctor uncertain. Storm delays possible." The blizzard swirling around him made that uncertainty a cruel fact. Richard was a wealthy man. His cattle empire stretched across 3 territories, built from nothing but sweat and stubborn will. He could buy anything, build anything, command respect from governors and railroad barons alike. But he couldn't heal his daughter, couldn't fight the fever stealing her away. Breath by shallow breath. 3 years ago, he'd lost Catherine in childbirth. The second baby hadn't survived either. Since then, he'd carried Emma and the ranch alone, convinced that self-reliance was strength. Now that conviction felt like arrogance. The train's whistle cut through the storm. Richard's heart lurched. He moved to the edge of the platform as the locomotive groaned to a stop, steam hissing into the bitter air. Passengers stumbled out. Hunched against the wind, a merchant, a young couple, 2 cowboys heading to work spring roundup. No doctor. Richard checked each face. Desperate. Then he saw the medical bag. A woman slumped against the station wall, 20 feet from the train. Her traveling cloak bore the crisp uniform collar of a nurse. Richard's boots crunched through snow as he ran to her. "Ma'am." He knelt, touching her shoulder. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused. Her lips were blue with cold. The connection was delayed. I've been waiting. 4 hours. You're a nurse. Helen Morrison. On my way to Laramie. Hospital posting. Her words slurred. Is there somewhere warm I just need? This my daughter, Richard said urgently. She's sick, high fever. 3 days now. Can you? Helen's eyes sharpened despite her obvious exhaustion. Training overrode her body's distress. What symptoms? Rash throat inflammation, coughing, difficulty breathing. She's 8 years old. I have her scarlet fever. Helen tried to sit up, failed. Or pneumonia. I've treated. Her voice faded as consciousness slipped. Richard didn't hesitate. He stripped off his heavy wool coat and wrapped it around her trembling body. She weighed almost nothing as he lifted her. Her medical bag dangled from frozen fingers, and he hooked it over his arm. Sir, the station master appeared in the doorway. That woman's been out here since noon. I told her to come inside, but she said she couldn't miss her connection. She missed more than that, Richard said grimly. She nearly died. He carried Helen to his wagon, settling her on the bench seat. The blizzard had worsened, visibility down to mere yards. 6 miles to the ranch, in this weather. It might take 2 hours. Richard climbed up, taking the reins. He wrapped a blanket around Helen's unconscious form and started the horses forward. I can't lose her too, he whispered to the woman who couldn't hear him. God help me. I can't bury another. The wagon lurched into the storm, carrying two desperate souls toward uncertain salvation. The world reduced to white chaos and the labored breathing of horses. Richard kept them moving, knowing that stopping meant freezing. Helen drifted beside him, sometimes muttering in delirium. Pulses thready, need to elevate. Sister Catherine always said. Her professional vocabulary surfaced even in unconsciousness, the language of healing deeper than awareness. Richard found himself talking to her. Words he'd never spoken aloud poured out into the storm's anonymity. Her name is Emma. She has her mother's eyes. Same bright blue. Loves to read. Asks questions about everything. She's all I have left. His voice cracked. Catherine died bringing our son into the world. I promised her I'd take care of Emma. Keep her safe. Some promise that turned out to be. Helen stirred, her head lolling against his shoulder. Not your fault? The unexpected response startled him. He glanced down to find her eyes half open, lucid for a moment. Fever takes who it takes, she murmured. You got help. That's what matters. You're fighting for her. Then she was gone again, slipping back into the gray space between sleep and waking. The ranch appeared like a mirage through the snow. Yellow lamplight glowed in the windows, warm and welcoming. Richard's housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, stood in the doorway, lantern raised. Thank God, she called. I was getting worried. Did you find a doctor? A nurse? Richard said. Climbing down. Help me with her. Mrs. Chen was small but strong, and together they carried Helen inside. The warmth hit like a wall. Richard felt his face burning as frozen skin began to thaw. They took Helen to the guest room. Laying her on the bed, Mrs. Chen quickly began removing the woman's wet clothing, replacing them with a warm nightgown. She's half frozen, Mrs. Chen said. What was she doing out there? Waiting for a connection that never came. I found her collapsed at the station. Richard paused at the doorway. How's Emma? Mrs. Chen's expression darkened. Worse. The coughing is constant now. She keeps asking for you. Richard's chest tightened. He moved to leave, but Mrs. Chen stopped him. Richard, this woman needs care too. She can't help Emma if she dies of exposure. I know. He looked back at Helen's pale face. But Emma is being watched. I'll sit with this one for now. You go to your daughter. I'll call you when the nurse wakes. Richard nodded. Grateful. He walked down the hall to Emma's room, where his little girl lay curled beneath quilts, her breathing shallow and rapid. Papa! Her voice was a whisper. I'm here. Sweetheart. He sat on the bed's edge, taking her small hand. It felt hot as a brand. Did you bring the doctor? A nurse. She's very sick herself right now, but when she wakes up, she'll help you. I promise. Emma's eyes closed. I'm tired, Papa. I know. Rest now. Everything's going to be all right. But as he sat there listening to her struggle for each breath, Richard wasn't sure he believed his own words. The storm howled outside, trapping them all together. 3 people under one roof. 2 of them fighting for life. One of them helpless to do anything but wait and pray. Richard had never felt more powerless in his life. 3 hours passed before Mrs. Chen appeared in Emma's doorway. She's awake and asking to see the patient. Richard blinked. She should rest. She nearly died herself. Try telling her that. Mrs. Chen's expression held grudging admiration. She's quite determined. Richard found Helen sitting up in bed, face still pale but eyes alert. She'd wrapped herself in a robe, and her medical bag lay open beside her. Mr. Matthews. Her voice was steady despite her obvious weakness. Your daughter. I need to see her. You need to recover. I've been recovering for 3 hours. That's sufficient. She tried to stand, swayed, and grabbed the bedpost for support. Richard moved quickly, steadying her. You can barely walk. Then help me walk. Helen met his eyes. I'm a nurse. Mr. Matthews, I didn't spend 6 years training so I could lie in bed while a child suffers. Something in her tone stopped his protests. This wasn't stubbornness or bravado. It was identity. Being a healer wasn't what she did. It was who she was. He offered his arm. She took it, and together they made their way to Emma's room. Helen's transformation was immediate. The moment she saw Emma, professional assessment took over. She crossed to the bed with surprising steadiness, her exhaustion seemingly forgotten. Hello, sweetheart. I'm Helen. I'm a nurse, and I'm going to help you feel better. Her voice was warm, confident. Can you tell me your name? Emma. The girl's eyes were glassy with fever. Are you the doctor? Better. I'm someone who spent years learning how to fight fevers. Helen placed gentle fingers on Emma's forehead, then her neck. How long has she been coughing? 3 days, Richard said. Getting worse each day. Helen listened to Emma's chest, her expression focused. She asked questions with calm precision. When did symptoms start? Any rash, difficulty swallowing, exposure. To others who were sick, Richard answered as best he could. Watching this stranger tend his daughter with practiced care, finally, Helen sat back. It's pneumonia. Not scarlet fever. Serious. But treatable if we act quickly. She looked at Richard. The medical supplies you ordered, are they here? In the front room. Good. I need willow bark extract, mustard plaster ingredients, and clean linens, also hot water, and a steam kettle. She reeled off the list without hesitation. Mrs. Chen, I'll need your help preparing a chest poultice. And for the next hour. Helen directed them with quiet authority. Despite trembling hands and obvious fatigue, she mixed medicines, applied warm compresses, and positioned Emma to ease her breathing. She showed Mrs. Chen exactly how to maintain steam in the room. Richard watched, amazed. This woman who'd been barely conscious an hour ago now worked with focused precision. Yeishach. Emma's coughing eased slightly under the treatment. Helen administered a careful dose of medicine, then helped the girl drink warm broth. There. Helen said softly, that should help you rest more comfortably. She turned to leave and stumbled. Richard caught her before she fell. I need to check on her in 2 hours, Helen said, even as her eyes struggled to stay open. You need to sleep. 2 hours, she insisted. Set a timer. Wake me. Richard helped her back to the guest room. She was asleep before her head touched the pillow. Mrs. Chen appeared beside him. That woman has a servant's heart. Richard nodded, looking between the 2 rooms. The storm still raged outside, trapping them together. He'd rescued Helen from freezing, and now she was fighting to save Emma. He picked up the lamp from the hallway table, carrying it as he moved between the rooms. Guardian to both patients now. The warm light flickered across his hands. Outside, the blizzard howled. Inside, 3 souls waited for dawn. Richard sat in the chair between the doorways and settled in for a long night. Emma's breathing had steadied. Helen slept the exhausted sleep of someone who'd given everything. And Richard Matthews, who'd spent 3 years convinced he needed no one, understood that the storm had forced a strange trinity upon him. His desperation, her dedication, Emma's fragile life, all bound together now, for better or worse. The blizzard lasted 3 days. Helen should have been resting. Her body still carried the deep chill of exposure, and Mrs. Chen scolded her constantly. But nurses don't rest when patients need care. Every 2 hours, Helen checked on Emma. She monitored temperature, adjusted medicines, taught Mrs. Chen proper steam treatment techniques. Between visits, she'd collapse into bed, sleeping in brief, deep interval. Richard tried to stop her on the second day. He blocked the doorway to Emma's room as Helen approached, her step still unsteady. "You're going to collapse again," he said firmly. "Then I'll treat myself after I treat your daughter." Helen's tone was polite but inflexible. "You barely survived exposure. You need rest." "But I need to do my job." She looked up at him with gentle steel in her eyes. "A fever doesn't wait for the healer to feel convenient. Mr. Matthews, now please move." He didn't move. They stood there, locked in a silent battle of wills. Helen tilted her head. "I could explain the medical necessity of consistent monitoring, or I could remind you that I'm the professional here. But honestly, I'm too tired for speeches. So I'll just say this move. Now." Richard stepped aside. As she passed, he caught the faintest smile on her lips. Emma improved under Helen's relentless care. The fever broke on the second night, when the child woke truly lucid for the first time in days. The first face she saw was Helen's. Are you an angel?" Emma whispered. Helen laughed softly. "Just a nurse. Sweetheart, much more practical than an angel. We carry bandages instead of harps." Emma giggled, then coughed. Helen adjusted her pillows with practiced efficiency. "Why do you help people?" Emma asked. "Because I can. Because someone taught me how, and now it's my turn to use what I know." Helen smoothed the blankets. "Your papa does the same thing. In his way, he builds things, provides for people. We all serve however we're able." Richard stood in the doorway, listening. He'd never thought of his work that way. Building a cattle empire had been about proving himself, about creating security for Emma. But maybe Helen was right. Maybe it was service too. On the third day, Richard found Helen in the kitchen, poring over his late wife's belongings. Mrs. Chen had brought down a box from the attic, looking for extra linens, and Catherine's old journal had been inside. "I'm sorry," Richard said quietly. "That's private. I just they no like him." Helen looked up, eyes bright with unshed tears. She wanted to be a midwife. It says so right here. She was studying on her own, learning everything she could. Richard nodded stiffly. She was always reading medical texts. Said the frontier needed women who understood childbirth. She died in childbirth herself. Helen's voice was gentle. "Yes, with our son. He didn't survive either." "No." Helen closed the journal carefully. "I'm sorry. That's the worst kind of helplessness." Richard sat down across from her. "I had the best doctor in the territory. I had money for any treatment, and I still couldn't save her." His voice roughened. "That's why Emma's fever terrified me. I can buy anything except health. See. That's why you watch me so intensely," Helen said. understanding dawning. Every time I help Emma recover, it's redemption for the one I couldn't save. Richard met her eyes. I know that's not fair to you, but yes. Helen reached across the table, briefly touching his hand. You're fighting for your daughter with everything you have. That's what matters. Catherine would be proud of you. The simple words cracked something inside Richard's chest. He'd carried guilt for 3 years, convinced his wealth should have been enough. Emma called from her room, and Helen rose to attend her. Richard watched her go, this stubborn woman who'd nearly died herself but couldn't stop helping others. Outside, the storm finally began to ease. The 4th day dawned clear and brutally cold. The world outside lay buried under 3 feet of fresh snow, but the sky stretched blue and endless. Helen was stronger now, moving without trembling. She spent the morning teaching Emma about the body's healing processes, turning illness into education. Feel your pulse here, Helen said, guiding Emma's small fingers to her own wrist. That's your heart pushing blood through your body. It's like a pump. Emma's eyes widened. Can I count it? Of course. Tell me what number you get. Richard watched from the doorway as his daughter concentrated, lips moving silently. When had she last been this engaged with anything since Catherine's death? Emma had been quiet, withdrawn. Now she peppered Helen with questions. Why does my chest hurt when I cough? Because your lungs are inflamed. They're working extra hard to heal. So they get sore, like muscles after running. I dice. Will I always get sick? No. Your body is learning to fight this infection. Next time you encounter something similar, you'll be stronger. That's how healing works. We learn and grow tougher. Emma absorbed this solemnly. Then, can girls be doctors? Helen's face lit up. Absolutely. Or nurses, or midwives, or medical researchers. Elizabeth Blackwell became a doctor 30 years ago. Women are proving we can do anything we set our minds to. Papa, did you know that? Emma looked at Richard with wonder. I'm learning all kinds of things lately, he said quietly. That evening, after Emma fell asleep, Richard offered Helen payment for her care. They sat in the main room, fire crackling, storm finally silent. I'd like to compensate you for what you've done, Richard said. Name your price. Helen stiffened. I didn't help your daughter for money, Mr. Matthews. You provided professional medical care. You should be paid. I helped because that's who I am. The moment you introduce payment, it becomes a transaction. And what happened here wasn't a transaction. Her voice was firm but not unkind. It was 2 people in crisis who helped each other survive. Richard studied her. You really see it that way? I rescued you. You healed Emma that's balanced. You did more than rescue me. You trusted me. Trusted my judgment. Even when it meant stepping back and letting me work. Helen met his eyes. Gee, do you know how rare that is? Most men would have tried to control everything. Insisted on their way. You supported my professional decisions. That's worth more than money. They talked late into the night. He told her about building the ranch from nothing, about losing Catherine, about trying to be both father and mother to Emma. She shared her own story, orphaned young, raised by nursing nuns in Philadelphia, finding purpose in healing. My mentor was Sister Catherine, Helen said, smiling at the coincidence. She taught me that nursing wasn't just a job. It was holy work, serving others with our gifts. Aikaichi, D&D. That's why you couldn't stop helping Emma, even when you were barely conscious yourself. Like I literally cannot do otherwise. It's woven into who I am. She paused. My father died when I was 10. After that, my mother just gave up. Stopped eating. Stopped caring. I watched her waste away over 6 months. And there was nothing I could do. That's when I decided never again would I stand by helplessly when someone needed help. Richard felt something shift inside him. This woman understood loss. Understood the desperation of watching someone suffer. And she'd transformed that pain into purpose. Emma's fortunate to have you as a father. Helen said quietly, my father never recovered after my mother died, but you're still here, still fighting for her. That's what matters. Her words settled over him like a benediction. For the first time since Catherine's death, Richard felt something other than guilt when he thought about the past. The fire burned low. Outside, stars gleamed against the black sky. Richard realized he didn't want Helen to leave. Emma's relapse came without warning on the 5th day. Richard found her coughing violently at dawn. Her fever spiked higher than before. Helen rushed in, still in her nightgown, and immediately recognized the signs. Secondary infection, she said, examining Emma with urgent efficiency. Bacterial bronchitis. Her body was weakened fighting the pneumonia. She began treatment immediately. But Richard could see the toll it took. Helen's hands shook as she prepared medications. Her face had gone pale again, the color she'd regained over recent days draining away. You need to rest, Mrs. Chen said firmly. After I stabilize her. Helen replied, but her voice lacked conviction. For 6 hours. Helen worked, monitoring, adjusting, treating. She refused to leave Emma's side. At noon, Richard found Helen collapsed in the hallway between the rooms. She'd tried to walk from Emma's room to fetch more supplies and simply crumpled. He lifted her as he had that first night, but this time was different. This wasn't rescue. This was partnership in crisis. I need to check her temperature. Helen mumbled as Richard carried her to bed. You need to rest. I'll check it. You don't know how? Then you'll teach me from here. Lie down and talk me through it. For the first time, Helen didn't argue. She was simply too exhausted. Richard spent the afternoon learning nursing basics by Helen's distant instruction. She would call out directions from her room, and he'd follow them precisely. Mrs. Chen assisted, but it was Richard who administered treatments, checked vitals, followed protocols. Firm but gentle pressure on the chest to listen for wheezing. Helen called. Do you hear bubbling or crackling? Richard pressed his ear to Emma's small chest, concentrating. Crackling on the left side. That's the infection. Keep the steam going. And make sure she drinks water every 30 minutes. He'd never felt so clumsy in his life. His hands, skilled at roping cattle and building fences, fumbled with medicine bottles and thermometers. But he learned. That night, Emma woke asking for Helen. Richard sat beside her, smoothing her sweat-damp hair. Miss Helen is resting. Sweetheart, she got sick taking care of you. Is she going to die? Fear sharpened Emma's voice. No, she just needs to recover her strength. I want her to stay. Papa. Emma's eyes filled with tears. Even after I'm well. Can she stay? Please. Richard had no answer. His daughter's plea echoed his own impossible thoughts. But Helen had a life planned. A position waiting in Laramie. She was a professional woman with ambitions beyond this ranch. "We'll see," he said quietly. "Rest now." "Aight." Mrs. Chen appeared in the doorway, her usually stoic face troubled. "I've been watching this household for 3 days now. That woman has brought something here that's been missing since Catherine died." "I know." "Then don't let her leave without at least asking." Mrs. Chen's voice was gentle. "I've seen the way you look at her. The way she looks at you when you're not watching. And Emma, that child, is thriving under her care. Helen's a nurse. She needs to practice her profession, not be confined to one ranch. Then maybe you ask her what she wants instead of deciding for her." Mrs. Chen smiled. "You learn to step back and let her work medically. Now do the same with her life." Richard sat with Emma through the long night, pondering impossible possibilities. Outside, the stars wheeled across the winter sky. By dawn, both his daughter and Helen were stable. But Richard's heart remained in crisis, pulled toward a future he couldn't quite articulate. The 6th morning broke crystalline and still. The blizzard's aftermath stretched white and pristine in every direction. Emma's fever had broken again during the night. This time, it stayed down. Helen emerged from her room at noon, weak but determined, and confirmed what Richard already knew. The crisis had passed. "She's past the worst of it," Helen said, relief evident in her voice. "Another week of care and she'll be fully recovered. Thanks to you. Thanks to all of us. You learned to follow medical protocols. Mrs. Chen maintained perfect steam conditions. We worked as a team." Helen smiled, but sadness touched her eyes. "The roads will be clear in a day or 2. I can continue to Laramie then." The words hit Richard like a physical blow. Of course she'd leave. She had a position waiting, a career to pursue. But the thought of this house without her felt unbearable. That afternoon, Emma took Helen's hand and wouldn't let go. "Please don't leave," the child begged. "We need you here. You make Papa smile again. I've heard him laugh for the first time since Mama died. And I want to learn more about medicine and healing and everything you know." Helen's composure cracked. Tears glistened in her eyes. "Oh, sweetheart. I have commitments. Responsibilities. I promised the hospital in Laramie. But we need you more." Emma's voice broke. "Please." Richard watched his daughter's grief, seeing his own feelings reflected perfectly. All his life, he'd built walls, maintained control, trusted only himself. But this stubborn nurse had shown him that strength sometimes meant surrendering, that accepting help wasn't weakness. He'd been alone, because he thought that's what strength required. And that evening, Richard found Helen in the barn. His men had spent the day clearing snow, and wagon routes would be passable by morning. Helen stood watching the sunset, her traveling bag already packed. The light painted everything rose gold, softening the harsh winter landscape into something almost beautiful. "Helen," Richard approached carefully. "Can we talk?" She turned, and he saw tears on her cheeks. "I'm sorry about Emma. I shouldn't have let her get so attached. It's unprofessional. I've been alone for 3 years," Richard said quietly, convinced that carrying everything myself was what a good father does, what a strong man does. He took a breath. "You've shown me something different. That accepting help, trusting someone's gifts, building partnership, that's another kind of strength." Helen watched him, waiting. "I want to offer you a position as our family's private nurse. Generous salary, your own quarters, full authority over medical decisions." He spoke carefully, formally. Emma needs ongoing care, and I need help. Helen's expression flickered with something he couldn't read. Is that what I'd be, an employee? No. I mean, Richard stumbled over the words. What I'm trying to say is we need you. Not as someone I hire, as someone who belongs here. Mr. Matthews. Richard, please. She studied his face for a long moment. I appreciate the offer, truly. But I'm not a possession to be hired. Richard, my work is my calling, not just employment. I need to practice nursing, to serve communities, to make a difference beyond one household. Then do that here. The words came in a rush. There are families within a day's ride who've never seen a trained nurse. You could establish a practice. Treat whoever needs help. I'd support it completely. Fund supplies. Help build a clinic, whatever you need. Helen's eyes widened. You'd let me practice independently, support my professional work. I'd be honored to... Richard stepped closer. I'm asking wrong. This isn't about hiring you or keeping you. It's about... He struggled to articulate what he felt. It's about building something together. You have gifts I don't. I have resources you could use, and Emma hasn't been this alive since her mother died. Silence stretched between them. A hawk circled overhead, its cry echoing across the frozen landscape. Let me think about it. Helen said finally, This is a big decision. Of course. Take whatever time you need. But as they walked back to the house in the fading light, Richard saw hope in her expression. And for the first time in 3 years, he let himself hope too. That night, Emma slept peacefully. Helen sat by her bedside, reading Catherine's old medical journal. Richard watched from the doorway, seeing past and future overlap. The storm had ended, but its aftermath would shape all their lives. Helen stayed to make her decision. That night, Emma asked to see her mother's journal. Helen brought it, settling beside the girl on the bed. Papa said Mama wanted to be a midwife. Emma said softly, She did. It's written all through here, her studies, her observations, her dreams. Helen opened to a marked page. Look. Today I assisted Mrs. Wilson's delivery. How I wish I had formal training. These women deserve better care than frontier guesswork. Ik had ding dead. Emma read silently, tracing her mother's handwriting with one finger. Then she looked at Helen with heartbreaking wisdom. Papa supported Mama's dream. He'd support yours too. The simple statement unlocked something Helen hadn't let herself see. She'd assumed staying meant abandoning her calling. But Emma was right. Richard understood professional passion. He'd encouraged his wife's ambitions. He was offering the same to Helen. The next morning, Helen found Richard in the barn. I'll stay, but I have conditions. His face lit with cautious hope. Name them. Eisen de Chi. Die. I'll serve as your family's nurse initially, but I want to establish a proper clinic within 6 months. I'll treat anyone who needs care. Regardless of ability to pay, you provide the building and supplies. But I maintain complete medical authority. No interference. Agreed. An bi chill. And Emma learns alongside me if she's interested. I won't just be caregiving, I'll be teaching. I'd hoped you would. Richard extended his hand. Partners. Helen shook it firmly. Partners. The months that followed brought transformation. Richard cleared and furnished a building on the edge of his property. Helen began seeing neighboring families treating injuries, delivering babies, fighting infections that would have claimed lives in her absence. Word spread of the skilled nurse at the Matthews Ranch. Women traveled for days to receive her care. Ranchers who'd never trust their livestock to veterinarians brought their children to Helen without a hesitation. Richard watched her work with growing admiration. She moved through her clinic with confident grace, teaching hygiene, explaining diseases, treating each patient with dignity regardless of their station. Emma thrived, spending hours in the clinic. She learned to mix medicines, sterilize instruments, take patient histories. At 9 years old, she could diagnose common ailments better than most adults. Richard and Helen's partnership deepened naturally. They discussed cases over dinner, Helen seeking his perspective on community dynamics, while he absorbed her medical insights. He began to see the frontier differently, not just as economic opportunity, but as a network of human needs. One July evening, a woman arrived in difficult labor. The local midwife had given up, saying the baby was positioned wrong. The family brought her to Helen as a last resort. Richard stayed through the long night, assisting as Helen worked. He held lamps, fetched supplies, supported the laboring mother while Helen manually adjusted the baby's position. At dawn, a healthy girl entered the world screaming. The mother wept with relief. Helen collapsed into a chair. Exhausted but triumphant, Richard brought her coffee. Their hands touched as she took the cup, and something shifted between them. The friendship they'd built had been deepening for months, growing into something neither had named. "I couldn't have done this anywhere else," Helen said quietly. "You've given me something I didn't know I needed." "What's that?" "Partnership. Someone who believes in my work as much as I do, who supports it without trying to control it." And she looked up at him. "You're not threatened by my calling. You celebrate it." "Because it's who you are," Richard said simply. "And who you are is remarkable." Their eyes held. The August sun rose over the clinic windows, painting everything gold. Neither spoke of love, but it hummed between them like a living thing, built on months of mutual respect and shared purpose. That afternoon, Richard proposed, not with grand gestures or flowery speeches, but with simple truth. "Marry me. Not because you need protection or I need a mother for Emma, but because we're better together than apart. Because your calling and mine create something larger than either of us alone." Helen said yes. Their wedding was small, held in the ranch house on a crisp October morning. Emma served as flower girl, beaming with joy. Mrs. Chen wept openly. The guests were families Helen had treated, ranchers Richard did business with, and 3 nursing students who'd traveled from Denver to study with Helen. The ceremony emphasized partnership. Their vows spoke of supporting each other's callings, of building together rather than one submitting to the other. "I promise to honor your gifts," Richard said. To support your work as passionately as I support my own. I promise to share this journey," Helen replied, "to build with you a legacy that serves our community and our family equally." Emma stood between them, hands clasped with both, grinning so wide her face hurt. But the true resolution came in what followed. Helen's clinic expanded into a formal nursing school. Richard funded scholarships for frontier women seeking medical training. Word spread across 3 territories. Women could come to the Matthews Ranch and learn professional nursing without traveling to distant cities. Students arrived farm daughters, widows seeking purpose, immigrants wanting to serve their communities. Helen taught them anatomy, pharmacology, patient care, and the sacred responsibility of healing. Emma, now 9, assisted in the children's ward Helen had established. The girl who'd nearly died of pneumonia now helped other sick children, bringing them comfort and explaining their treatments in language they could understand. The train station where Richard had found Helen became a regular stop for nursing students. Women traveled from across the West to study with the legendary nurse Matthews. Galindaner bidor stai. One spring morning, Richard stood at that same platform. But instead of dying winter light, dawn painted everything gold. Instead of desperate solitude, Emma stood beside him, confidently discussing medical advances. Helen's wagon rolled up. She climbed down, kissed Richard briefly, then turned to greet the nervous young women stepping off the train. "Welcome," she said warmly. "I'm Helen Matthews. You're about to learn that healing isn't just treating illness. It's building community. One patient, one family at a time." The students followed her toward the school, chattering with excitement and nerves. Richard walked beside Emma toward the clinic. The building bore a plaque beside the entrance, a heavy wool coat displayed under glass with simple words, "Where healing began." Inside, lamps burned in every window, 20 lights where once there'd been only one. The lamp Richard had carried between rooms during that first blizzard had multiplied, illuminating an entire community's future. "Papa," Emma said, "when I finish my training, I want to open a children's hospital." Richard smiled. "That them will build one together." They walked into the clinic where Helen was already teaching, her voice clear and confident. Morning sunlight streamed through windows, warming everything it touched. Richard thought back to that winter night, the desperation, the storm. The woman he'd found freezing on a platform. He'd thought he was rescuing her, but she'd rescued him just as thoroughly, showing him that strength wasn't carrying burdens alone. It was finding the courage to share them. Love and purpose together had created something far larger than either of them alone. Individual rescue had become community transformation. Private healing had become public legacy. Outside, spring bloomed across the Wyoming frontier. Inside, the work of healing continued, multiplying with each student trained, each patient served, each life touched. And in the center of it all stood 3 people who'd found each other in the heart of a blizzard father, daughter, and the nurse whose stubborn dedication had saved them both. The lamp still burned, but now its light reached farther than Richard had ever imagined possible. That was the true miracle. Not the rescue, but what they'd built from it. Not the survival, but the legacy. Together.